nurturing cogenerational social connections. Let me just get my screen going. And there we are. Our Socially Connected Communities Network builds and supports a movement to advance action that results in more socially connected and equitable communities. I'm Risa Wilkerson. I'm Executive Director of Healthy Places by Design, and I am joined today by my colleagues who will be providing support to maximize your webinar experience today. Thank you to Joanne Lee for joining us. She is our Senior Project Director and will help facilitate the Q&A portion of today's webinar. And thank you, Becky Snyderman, our Project and Events Coordinator, who is here serving as our chat manager for the webinar and will be providing a Zoom platform and logistical support. I know we've all been on Zoom for what feels like forever, but it is always advantageous just to do a quick reminder of the features. Today, we are using our chat box for comments, reactions, for you to share any related resources you think may be helpful. And we encourage you to use the setting to everyone so that folks can see what you have to say in your introductions of yourself, your comments, and anything that you're sharing. If you do need one-on-one logistical support, then direct your chat to Becky and she'll be happy to help you out. And we know that participant chats can be a great way to gauge how the webinar content is resonating. However, if you find this discussion in the chat to be distracting, you can close it. You can disable the chat notifications in Zoom, and that may help you focus if that's something that would be helpful to you. We're also using the Q&A box for questions. And so if you've got some questions as we go along, you don't have to wait until the end to put them in the Q&A box. You can be loading them up as we go. But please do use Q&A versus chat. It helps us to keep things separate and manage things more easily to address your questions. We've also made closed captions available in this webinar, so feel free to turn that on if that's helpful. And yes, the webinar is being recorded. And yes, you will receive the recording, the slides, and a resource guide afterwards. So if it's helpful to you to know that and not feel like you have to take a bunch of notes, know that you will be having access to those later. So let's begin. We're so excited for this particular topic, nurturing cogenerational social connections. This is something that we have seen become increasingly talked about. Intergenerational strategies and the need to bring generations together has been a very hot topic for a while now, and I cannot wait to introduce you to our two fantastic presenters and guests who will be sharing more with us. But before I do, we'd love to learn a little bit about you. So we're going to take a poll. Does your community employ strategies to strengthen intergenerational social connections? So we'd love for you to say yes, no, or unsure. And we'll give you a minute to answer that. We'll share the results with you as well. This is just super helpful to sort of see who's on the call. And by the way, as we were listening to that beautiful song, I saw many of you introducing yourselves. You're coming from across the country. I saw someone from Canada, and I just find it personally so exciting that we can all be together in this way, talking about social connections and joining from many faraway places. So we have everyone has responded. This is amazing. Or actually almost everyone has responded. And we'll give you just about 10 more seconds to answer the question and then we'll close the poll. Great. So it looks like about 40% of you are saying yes, 26% of you are saying no, and the rest of you are unsure. So that's great. We're glad that you're here. We will certainly have much to share. If those of you who said yes have some strategies that you use for connecting the different generations, we would love for you to go ahead and put those in chat so that we can kind of hear a little bit more from you as well. And now It is just my pleasure to introduce you to two amazing people who are not only thought leaders in the cogenerational space, but they have become good friends of Healthy Places by Design in our planning sessions and other ways that we've connected. First of all, we have Eunice Nichols. She is the co-CEO of CoGenerate. And CoGenerate is a social impact organization dedicated to making the most of our increasingly multi-generational society. And Eunice has spent more than 2 decades bringing older and younger generations together to bridge divides and solve problems, including leading CoGenerate's innovation portfolio, serving as a national campaign director for the Generation to Generation initiative, running the Purpose Prize, now a program of AARP, and scaling Experience Corps from one neighborhood school in San Francisco into a thriving Bay Area program helping thousands of kids read by grade 3. Eunice has been recognized as a Next Avenue influencer in aging. That's a cool title, and is the graduate of the Billions Institute Fellowship for Large Scale Change. She's also a recipient of the James Irvine Foundation Leadership Award for advancing innovative and effective solutions to California's most significant issues. Welcome, Eunice. And we also have Daniel Pryfogle, who is the co-founder and CEO of Sympara. And Sympara is a multi-faith community with a public mission to repurpose religious assets for the common good. This includes exploring the creation of mixed-use developments on religious property that provide housing, supportive services, and economic opportunities for all ages. The activation of religious space by people of different faith traditions and no religious affiliation is a co-generational endeavor. Daniel is a CoGenerate Innovation Fellow, an advisor and faculty member for the Lilly Endowment-funded Changemaker Church Movement, founder of Signal Hill, which pioneered the use of narrative marketing in senior living, and founder of Senior Correspondent, the nation's first media venture driven by the reporting of veteran journalists and the stories of older adults. Daniel is trained not only as a journalist, but he's also an ordained Baptist minister. So please join me in welcoming Eunice and Daniel. And we'll begin our conversation with you, Eunice.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for having me, Risa. I'm very excited to be here.
Thank you. You know, we were excited to have you as well because we saw that your organization is really driving some of these conversations in a unique kind of way. And you note that we're living in the most age-diverse society in human history and one of the most age-segregated. Can you tell us why we are so age-segregated and what does research tell us about why that matters for our health and well-being?
Yeah, thanks for inviting me to offer some context for this conversation. I want to start by anchoring us in a set of major demographic trends that many of you may be tracking, but some of you may not be. But regardless, these trends are dramatically reshaping society as we know it. The first one is what this chart here demonstrates, and it's the aging of America. By 2035, our country will, for the first time, be more old than young. And some of that's due to advances in technology and healthcare, which is leading to longer lives. But birth rates are also on the decline as Americans delay or forego marriage. Women are having children later in life. And a lot of conversations we have reveal that young people report less confidence about bringing children into a world and a climate that's in real crisis. So for the foreseeable future, the only thing preventing the US population from shrinking is immigration. So while there's been a growing understanding about our country's new longevity, the underappreciated trend that's been happening right under our noses is actually our country's age diversity. So in this slide, this is what we think is the story that everybody actually needs to be talking about. So when you look at this chart, you can see that 100 years ago, more than half the population in the US was under 18, with fewer people in each subsequent age group. It's this blue triangle. But when you look at the same chart today and look at what's in orange, there we go, it's a flat line. And that triangle has become a rectangle with essentially the same number of people alive at every age from birth to 74. That means we're the most age diverse society in human history. But Risa, you asked me about this growing age diversity in our country. While we are the most age diverse structurally, we're actually the most age segregated we've ever been. Our institutions, our infrastructure, our policies are literally designed to pull us apart. Often that's happened because of efficiency. We put young people in schools, middle-aged people in the workplaces, and older adults are often in senior centers, retirement communities that are not age diverse, and nursing homes. In fact, Carl Pilmer, who's a professor of human development at Cornell University, called this systematic segregation of old from young a dangerous experiment. Others have actually gone as far as to call it age apartheid.
Hmm.
So it's really driven a raft of problems that include rampant ageism, generational conflict. It's turned age groups into interest groups and pitted youngers against olders in ways that we were never designed to fight one another. So we often describe this as a tale, a tale of two futures. One that looks like the Villages, which is an age segregated, racially and ideologically homogenous retirement community in Florida, which at population 145,000 is actually the fastest growing metropolitan area in America and has been over the last decade. So the rise in places like that, segregated by age, race, and ideology, point to the possibility of Carl Pilmer's dangerous experiment winning out. But at the same time, there's been this fourfold increase in multi-generational living. And if you all are following the news like me, there's really not a week that goes by where you won't see a headline about an older and younger person that have found each other and are developing a beautiful friendship, which is not a surprise when we know that our country is also facing a real epidemic of loneliness and isolation that's disproportionately impacting older and younger people. Even the Harvard Business Review recently published a piece on the rising importance of intergenerational friendships in the workplace. So all of those trends point to the possibility that that dangerous experiment is on its last legs. What I'll say to round out my answer to your great question is that we were really designed to be together instead of pulled apart. And there's an evolutionary concept called the grandmother effect that says that the role of older people in caring for children and helping parents create the family structure is what led us to becoming human beings in the first place. It's also why intergenerational connection and collaboration has often been described by John A. Powell at University of Berkeley as the short bridge to repairing some of the most contentious divides. If we can tap into that intergenerational connection and collaboration, we can actually shortcut some of the tensions in society and rebuild chosen family, extended family across generational lines.
That's really beautiful. And as a grandmother myself, I absolutely love that concept. I think that's amazing. And I think any of us who kind of are around folks of different generations can attest to how it can open our creativity and help us to see things in different ways. So I really appreciate that. Eunice, your organization also created a new word that is now in your title, right? So cogeneration. And I understand you did that as a way to flip the script. Can you share more about how this word takes the concept of intergenerational to another level? And then what approaches you have used to incorporate this into your work?
Yeah, so as an organization, CoGenerate, we do a number of things. One is we focus a lot on narrative change and opening up the imagination to new possibilities, in this case of older and youngers coming together to co-create a better future. Often we find we're limited by language and what people associate with existing words. And so I appreciate you kind of describing that as flipping the script. We love, to be clear, we love the word intergenerational and multi-generational. There are great words that are out there. But often those words are used in a broad umbrella. Intergenerational can mean any interaction between older and younger. Is multi-generational is like the presence of people of all ages in one space. But we were feeling like we were lacking a little edge around an anchor point of the work that we increasingly feel called to do. And that's a focus on the with, not just what one generation can do for the other, but the power of the what happens when older and youngers come together for the greater good. And so we describe cogeneration, which we've taken from the energy sector as, but used in the social sector as a strategy that brings older and younger people together to solve today's toughest problems. There are so many world-ending problems right now. There is no way one generation can solve it on their own. We need to bring all resources to bear. We believe this strategy can be very powerful in bridging differences. That's that grandmother effect and John A. Powell's concept of the short bridge to solving divides. So that's part of the secret sauce. The third one is creating connection. And the fourth one is when we design across generations, we actually co-create a better future for all of us. In terms of some of the frameworks that we think about around narrative is this need to shift the narrative in four ways. One is from victims to agents of change. Both olders and youngers in varying ways can often be pushed off to the edges of society. You are too young to make a difference. Wait your turn. Or if you're an older person, your day is done, pushed off to the fringes, and no longer part of what is shaping the culture and the work of society. We believe that that actually olders and youngers are the solution to becoming agents of change. And from this one directional sense of what can one generation do for the other to what can they do for each other. So from this other one is from tokenism to power sharing. By that, what we mean is that we need different models that aren't looking at intergenerational connection or intergenerational diversity as window dressing, but a real circulation of power. Each generation has something special to offer. How can they actually circulate that and create more power by working together? Also asking questions like who are we engaging in a program and who is it designed for? Often that means that if we just bring in a few older adults to say it's intergenerational or a few young people to say it's intergenerational, but we haven't redesigned the system, it doesn't enable the olders or youngers to actually contribute at their fullest potential. The third topic that we talk about is shifting from conflict to collaboration. That means beyond just being proximate with one another, just because we have olders and youngers existing in the same space doesn't mean that we can create that we've created spaces where we can be anchored in shared purpose and problem solving and look at collaboration versus just focusing on the divides. The last one is to shift from me to we. So much of American society glorifies independence. And the cogenerational frame says that interdependence is so much more powerful. So there's that piece too. In the end of the day, we're better together. The last little bits of resources that I'll bring to the forefront is that Arthur Brooks talks about the difference between fluid intelligence and crystallized intelligence. And fluid intelligence is kind of what young people have that makes them quick starts. They can think of new ideas. They are not bounded by what has come before. We need that. That's the spark that gets so many things done. But older folks, as they age, there's a different kind of intelligence that is very much on the rise, and that's the crystallized intelligence. It's the intelligence that allows you to synthesize a lot of data to get to the meaning behind what's happened. When you think about putting those two together, that's the magic of cogeneration. We often like to tell the story of BMW, of all companies, that did a test of 3 different assembly lines. One was filled with just young people, one was with older folks, and then one was mixed. And as you might expect, the assembly line with young people got the work done much more quickly, but there were a lot of mistakes. The assembly line with older folks had very few mistakes, but they were very slow and produced very little. And when they did the mixed age group, they had a far more higher production with far fewer mistakes. So that's sort of that fluid and crystallized intelligence working together.
That's great.
Yes, so this is the last bit of research that we've done that would love for you all to engage in. If you go to our website, www.cogenerate.org, you can see some research we've done most recently with University of Chicago and their National Opinion Research Center, which showed that there's clear pent-up demand from people of all ages to work across generations for change. One thing that was surprising for us is Gen Z and people of color reported the greatest desire to work across difference, that if opportunities were presented to them to do things co-generationally, they would be 2 times more likely than others to engage in that activity. So all of that is just part of the range of research and things that are happening culturally that point to the real potential for cogenerational strategies to make a real difference in our communities.
Well, thank you for sharing that research. It's really encouraging to see. Not only are we the most age diverse, but when you start to see this research behind the potential for really leveraging that age diversity, it's pretty powerful stuff, and that's exciting. And I know that you and your team, work all across the country, and you see a whole variety of approaches. And so we'd love to hear a little bit about, how CoGenerate has positioned this need that you've described to build strong social connections across the generations as you've worked, not just for the, all their very beneficial outcomes, but to build social connection. And any example you might share about those approaches within a community, how that might change places that are designed and are activated to improve quality of life for all residents.
Mhm. Yeah, I appreciate that. And I'm so glad to be sharing the space with Daniel because I think he'll also give some really amazing examples grounded in communities and in placemaking. So I will, for now, stick with just a framework that we think about, which is three Ps: proximity, purpose, and problem solving. And I'll start with the first, which is, we would say, preconditions to creating a healthy intergenerational spaces. Proximity is, I'd say, necessary but not sufficient. There are many places in our communities where we can see olders and youngers. They are present, but they might not be interacting at all. I think about my own neighborhood where there are olders and young families with young children here, all behind closed doors. You drive, it's the classic suburban existence. We drive our cars into a garage and you just might not see anybody. We have proximity, but it's not enough. But it is the starting ingredient. So there's proximity. The next one is purpose. So as we think about how to design meaningful cogenerational spaces, how might we anchor a shared purpose between older and younger generations? Often that can be a shared desire to solve for social isolation and loneliness. It could be a shared desire for lifting each other up in our work, where young people may need more robust networks. Older folks may be trying to figure out how to stay relevant in today's work environment. How might that actually be a shared purpose to be a better team together? It could be around creating spaces that are equally viable for older adults and young people to come together and be part of society. The purpose is what can get people focused on what they have that's shared versus what they have that is divided. But I think for us, the real secret sauce is this last one. It's the problem solving. If we can get older and younger generations actually collaborating and working together on mixed generation teams, that's where we get that fluid and crystallized intelligence, the practices and habits of working across difference to make something happen in their community. That's for us the secret sauce. And it's in part because, not to say conversation and relationship building is important, but turning that relationship and conversation into something that benefits the community, gets people out of their own way. It's a little bit that shift from the independence of it's just about me to the interdependence. Together, we can do more together. For us, we feel like if anytime you can look for places where older and youngers are proximate, shift them to shared purpose, and then design something where they can actually go after and do something together, that's the path towards really robust cogeneration.
Thank you, Eunice. And what a great setup for our next guest, Daniel, if you'll join us as well. We're really glad that you're here. We know that Sympara has a very unique mission. We were excited to learn more about it in the last few months. Could you share with us about how your organization works with faith-based organizations? And that will, I think, help to exhibit some of what Eunice was just talking about in terms of that movement over to place problem solving.
Yeah, definitely. And thank you for the invitation to be here, Risa. I've been looking forward to this conversation and always excited to hang out with Eunice. Yeah, so PAR's mission is to help communities reimagine underutilized religious properties for social impact. Think of all of the religious buildings and parking lots that sit empty most of the week in your neighborhood, your town, your city. These are spaces that can be repurposed for meaningful change for things like affordable housing, affordable childcare, um, accessible healthcare, space for nonprofits, co-working space, maybe performance space, space for enterprises owned by women and people of color. All of this can happen in underutilized religious properties. The kind of by its nature, the reimagination of underutilized religious properties is a cogenerational endeavor. And I'll say a little bit more about that later. Our vision is that just, equitable, and sustainable communities will emerge through sacred civic placemaking. That term, sacred civic placemaking, might be new to many of you, but I think the term placemaking is probably very familiar to many on this call. So it's helpful for a minute just to unpack the term here. Placemaking is the participatory process of designing, redesigning settings as livable communities. So think of livable as walkable, equitable, and sustainable. Sacred civic placemaking builds on that definition of placemaking and adds to it the reimagination of religious space as common space by congregations and their neighbors. So no longer is the space just for the congregation, but it's for the wider community as well. Sacred civic placemakers, the folks who engage in this work with us, are members of congregations, and they're also community members, neighbors who take on this work, which again is cogenerational by necessity. Most congregations in the United States are made up of older people, or olders, as Eunice says, and I love that term as well. I saw somebody in the chat celebrated that phrase. And these olders need hope, and they need purpose for the future. Their neighbors are often younger, especially in urban areas. Think about areas that are gentrifying, that have faith communities in them. Those neighbors are often younger, and these are youngers who need connection. Maybe they need some grandparents. So imagine how these intergenerational needs across these generations can be met through sacred civic placemaking.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I really love that image. And I think probably most people can have either experienced this in their own neighborhoods or can imagine it for sure. I appreciate that context. Can you share a bit more then about how faith-based organizations and communities adopting co-generational approaches are helping to reshape place for greater quality of life? What does that actually look like? Conceptually we see it, but can you
Yeah,
share a bit more?
yeah, definitely. But I'll say a word first about our process. We strengthen social connections between olders and youngers through the work of discernment, which for us is the process of seeking clarity about identity and purpose via the stewardship of religious property. So we come into a community initially with questions like, who are we? And why are we in this place? And it's a question that we ask of both the congregation as well as neighbors. With that clarity about identity, we're able to move into some shared vision around purpose. And then ultimately, how can, in a very concrete way, how can the physical property be leveraged to live more fully into this identity and this purpose? Our work draws upon narrative practices, design thinking, asset mapping, and experimentation in the reuse of space. When we do this work, it can often generate some anxiety, as you might imagine, for the members of a congregation who've been accustomed to having that property just for themselves. And we're encouraging them to open the door and open the space to others. It's really important to bring the conversation from the abstract level down to the concrete. So experimentation is really important. Pop-ups, short-term reuses of space that can help people see, wow, this can be very powerful as we bring olders and youngers together to use this space, for the benefit of our neighbors.
Yeah.
We one of the favorite sayings that you see on the slide here that is near and dear to us are words from the urbanist Jane Jacobs, who says that old ideas can sometimes use new buildings. New ideas must use old buildings. Talk about flipping the script, as mentioned earlier. And we believe that the corollary is true. Old ideas sometimes need younger people. New ideas always need older people.
Yeah, That's
Yeah,
beautiful. And
yeah,
in fact, Daniel, I really like the way you've been just sort of describing this, like folks needing to sort of open their thinking about what
yeah,
this space has always been used for. That's true of many of our assets and communities, not just the faith-based, assets, churches and such, but people thinking this is only a senior center, but wait, it could be
yeah.
more, right? Yeah,
Yes, yes, or a park that has limited, where folks are accustomed maybe to a set of limited activities. It could be
yeah,
so much more than that. Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I want to tell you, Reese, about one story that's fresh in my mind that I think helps to make all of this concrete. It's a church in Oakland, California, which calls itself the Jazz and Justice Church. Its official name is Plymouth United Church of Christ, but they love their tagline, the Jazz and Justice Church. And it's a multiracial, multi-ethnic, intergenerational congregation, which is really wonderful. I've had the privilege of being with them on several occasions. We're helping this congregation discern with its neighbors the possibility of building affordable housing on the church property. And the reason that the church is getting into this is, well, there's a couple of reasons. First of all, they want to reckon with their history. In the 1950s, Plymouth refused to sell its former building to a Black congregation. This was
Mm.
the period of exclusionary housing, and um, even in a progressive place like Oakland, California, that was just kind of baked into the system there. Um, so they want to reckon with that history. Secondly, they want to bring forward what's best about their history, which is this history, this legacy of justice. So the community's got older and younger members wrestling with history and legacy, and it's a community that wants to do the right thing, a community that wants to thrive well into the future. So that's an example that's really fresh in my mind as we think about this work of sacred civic placemaking that is co-generational.
Well, I love the complexity of that and that folks are so willing to step back and think and reflect and honor and also acknowledge as part of that process.
Yeah.
It sounds hard. What's the
Yes,
greatest
indeed.
challenge? Yeah, in thinking about that sort of discernment process, what is the greatest challenge and how do you work through it?
Yeah, it is hard, and we don't dance around that reality. I think the greatest challenge is when for the faith community is the building of trust. It's trust with their neighbors, but it's also trust among themselves, and sometimes it often falls along generational lines. So for olders, it's about trusting that youngers might cherish history, actually have an interest in history, and want to preserve what's best about it. And for youngers, it's trusting that older adults can handle change. Think about that. I think across generations, because of the society we live in, we're going to be susceptible to stereotypes. And one stereotype of older adults is that they can't handle change. But when you dig into the history of a congregation like Plymouth Church, you see multiple transformations over time, bold steps that they took. So the olders have experienced quite a bit of change. That mutual trust then creates empathy, and I would call it a kind of sensitivity without fear.
Mm.
They're not walking on eggshells around each other, but they are sensitive to their different viewpoints, the different perspectives that come from their lived experience.
Yeah.
Um, One other thing I'll say about this while we're on it, uh, in our discernment process, which brings olders and youngers together, we use a variety of practices, as I mentioned earlier. And one practice that we've used at Plymouth that helps them say yes to history is the practice of appreciative inquiry. Some of the folks on this webinar might have used that tool before. It's an organizational development tool. We use it to evoke stories of when the congregation has been most faithful in its use of the property for social impact. And then we use the tool to imagine how the church might build on that history. Everyone at Plymouth in our process, whether they are younger or older, had a chance to tell a story about when the congregation was faithful in its use of the property. Some stories were from a long time ago. Maybe those were stories that were told by the elders. And then some stories were more recent. Think about the younger people that are there that maybe have less history with the place. But across these stories, there are common threads. And the common threads are community assets that once named, we can begin to leverage.
Mhm.
So in Oakland, California, out of that storytelling, church members articulated dreams for the future that leverage the experience of the past and also each other's experience, their lived experience. These dreams too are a community asset. I think of those words of the Jewish prophet who imagines a time when old people dream dreams and young people see visions in community together. So the vision that's emerging for Plymouth is about multi-generational community, or co-generational, to use Eunice's wonderful term. It's about creating and celebrating life together through housing and, of course, through jazz and justice.
I love that tagline and that story. And can you remind me if you've already said it, like how long has this been going on with Plymouth United Church?
Yeah, so they've been having these kinds of conversations for a couple of years. Our work has been over this past year. Yeah,
Okay,
we're in the midst of about a year-long discernment process.
that's helpful. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Daniel. Thank you for
Yeah.
sharing the story and the vision and putting some real sort of local story to the concepts as well. Eunice, I'd love to bring you back and see if you have anything you'd like to add, if this has made you think of some additional stories as well.
Yeah, so many touch points between what Daniel is doing. I love the story. We track a lot of innovation actually uh, in spiritual spaces where, as Daniel said, there are a lot of older adults still who have access to resources, but need stronger connections with young people, even just to carry on some of the traditions to pass those on, but have to have a very open-handed way of looking at what it looks like to share power and pass those traditions on in ways that could be reshaped and remade on behalf of young people in the community. And then music is another area that we really track because we think sometimes we say that cogenerational collaboration needs a soundtrack. What's the soundtrack for the movement? And the good thing is in music, that's one area where olders and youngers are still very much collaborating to make some of the greatest music that touches our hearts. So the Jazz and Justice Church makes total sense. Um, we have been tracking a few innovators. One is John Adam Ross with the Inheritance Theater Project. Some of you may have heard of this work, but they do intersectional, intergenerational, and interfaith work with communities where they go into a community, they build relationships across all these different intersectional divides, and then but this is that, if you remember the proximity, purpose, and problem solving, they take communities that are not usually talking to each other, and then they bring them together around an activity of participatory playmaking, where they'll actually examine the cultural touchstones that are different and the same. And then they will together put on a community designed performance that is kind of the problem solving and doing a thing together. And in the process of doing that, they work through all kinds of hard moments and differences in the way they view things because they're doing something creative. But that's once again the power of music and the arts to transcend some of the ways that we're just entrenched in our behaviors. Um, they actually this past summer worked in the city of LA to design a performance that they called Guess Who's Coming to the Juneteenth Seder. And it was a collaboration between Black communities and Jewish communities to come together and tell a shared story that was really powerful. Um, so I just think there's so many threads that tie all these different areas together.
Yeah, thank you. And this Drexel University
Oh yeah,
example?
sorry, I forgot that we have this beautiful slide. See, Daniel inspired me with an abundance of other stories. So let me tell you this story. This is one of my favorite stories about Drexel University. Rachel Wenrick is a professor there who teaches creative writing, but was given the freedom and the creativity to design a creative writing program that would engage elders from the community with students uh, in in this class. And so that was in some ways the proximity piece, right? You had older adults and students who were living in the same neighborhood but had no reason to interact, and then she brought them together in a class. So that was the proximity. There was the purpose that happened in part because they were both very focused on learning how to tell their stories and each other's stories. But then one day during class, one of the elders in the class who lived in the community, kind of a gentrifying community in part because of Drexel's presence, Carol came in and said that she was about to be displaced from housing. She was going to be kicked out of her housing because developers were coming and taking over the building and was in real distress. And it was one of the younger students that said, we've spent time in this class learning each other's stories and becoming dear friends across generations to one another. Surely there must be more we can do together than write. And out of that moment, these olders and younger started to solve a collective problem around housing. Older adults being displaced in the community from gentrification, young people who are coming to study at Drexel unable to afford rent to be able to live and be educated there. They came up with a new initiative called Second Story Collective, which is a vision for olders and younger sharing in housing together, meeting the needs of both young people being able to pay reduced rent, to older folks being able to open up their spaces to young people. There's now one of the biggest developers in Philadelphia has bought up an entire city block near Drexel to basically create the manifestation of Second Story Collective for olders and youngers to live together. In a recent conversation with Rachel, she laughed because she said, I'm a professor of creative writing, and none of my work right now is contained to creative writing." She is the biggest community advocate. They've out of this writing program spun the Second Story Collective. They do Sunday community dinners now in the community. It's like a big potluck where older and younger people in the community come together and just break bread. All of this launched out of Drexel, which is presumably a university for young people, but it's not. It's really kind of redeeming and flipping the script on what a university can and should be, and even what a professor can or should be. So there's a whole rabbit hole of more stories that are coming out of Drexel, but it's one of my favorites because it's so counterintuitive. But when you are there and experience it, it's the most natural thing possible.
That's
I
so
love
beautiful. Yeah.
Reese, if I could jump in, I love that. I love that story, and it it uh, it goes to what Eunice was saying earlier about kind of that magic spot where the magic happens when you start to solve a problem together. And I think of John Dewey's famous saying that the learning is in the doing. We just got to get into it together. Dialogue, as Eunice said earlier, is always really important, but ultimately we got to get down to where the rubber meets the road and do some things together. And it's through that we're going to forge those bonds that are so important to mitigating loneliness and isolation. And through that, be able to do great things like they're doing at Drexel.
Yeah. Well, and I think also about this, we're all longing for purpose and meaning. And for older generations, many that I talk to, there is a longing to continue to be of service and to matter. And whether that be being open to taking a look at the space you have, whether it be a sanctuary or whether it be a spare bedroom in your home or whether it be your neighborhood park. How do you take the spaces where you interact and start to proactively, intentionally open up yourself to interacting with young people? For young folks, also, stepping into a pretty uncertain, scary world. What does it feel like if we are living further from our home bases than ever before?
Hmm.
What does it look like for young people to have kind of chosen found elders and family, a different kind of
Wow.
family where they're living, especially older folks who may not be transitional? It can be a little bit more of the bedrock that we used to have more naturally and now has been pulled apart. I think those are the ways that we can really find purpose and live in community together.
Yeah, definitely.
I do love that. And I do believe that as we all find purpose and feel valued to others and by others of different ages and frankly who are, in different stages of life, different places, have had different experiences, it also helps us to feel like we're living a life of dignity, right? Too, in
Yeah.
addition to feeling that sense of meaning and purpose. And that's critically important as well. We're going to go to questions here in just a moment. So if you've got some questions, if you've been listening in and you have some questions that you have not yet typed into the Q&A, please do so. We'd love to hear from you and answer any questions that you have. While those are getting queued up, I would love for each of you to very briefly share any advice that you have that you would give to others who want to do similar work in their communities. And I'll start with you, Daniel.
Yeah, my advice would be to start small. Often in social change stuff, we may try to start big, but start small. Get a win, get a quick win, and notice the energy that comes from that. By the way, that's what discernment essentially is. It's about noticing energy, noticing movement. An example in our work is we do 1 hour Zoom meetings to map a community's assets. We'll bring members of a congregation together with neighbors, and together we'll identify a problem that they want to solve, and then very quickly identify resources that are in that neighborhood that can be leveraged to solve that problem. In 1 hour, we get to know each other. We do something very practical, to Eunice's point about problem solving, and we leave with a sense of abundance that is the resources of our shared community, but also the abundance of our experience across olders and younger. So I would say do that. And if you're interested in a free tool, we've got one. It's called Sympara, named after our organization, sympara.app. You can sign up there and begin to map assets.
Thank you, Daniel. Eunice?
Like Daniel, I feel like there's a lot of work out there that's incredibly complicated, sort of the proverbial rocket science. In some ways, this is not it. I'm continually amazed by how simple it can be to just get started. So I would look for the small moves. If you are a organization that has access to only olders or only to youngers, it means that you should look for a partnership play. Who out there has the opposite demographic as you and is probably longing for the same type of connection and broader viewpoint or ability to do more? So many organizations we know actually have all the components. They may have a program for olders and probably a separately designed program for youngers. May happen at a different time of day, doing totally different things. The one that I find most interesting is when an organization has like two service programs. One that's older adults doing good in the community in some way, and they've got like a separate young person's group doing good in the community. How do you take those natural touch points and just bring them together? It can be experimental. Nobody needs to commit to it long term. Do a one-time intergenerational event, but provide some scaffolding where people actually get to know each other and tell some life stories, and share not just one directional once again, but young people have incredible life stories too.
Yeah.
Their timelines have been compressed. The kinds of challenges and things they're dealing with are legend. So they will be able to bring that to the table too, and then engage in activity together. You'd be surprised what that might lead to. The last thing I'll say is we, even at CoGenerate, get in trouble sometimes by we'll come up with a great idea that is a cogenerational, activity. And then we'll design it and we'll go launch it and execute it. And then we realize after the fact that we didn't actually include somebody much older and somebody much younger in the actual design of the event. And when we don't do that, what happens is those that are of a similar background as us had a great experience at the event,
Right.
but the folks on the fringe might not have. And then if we don't go back and ask them, we won't even know. We'll just think we did a great job. We have to peel all the way back to the co-creation of the actual thing, whatever it is. It could be the smallest thing. It could just be you want to plan an intergenerational Thanksgiving dinner. How might you engage a young person in your family or in your community and the oldest in saying, what could this meal look like that would actually help you feel centered, and that you could contribute the best that you have to offer? What conversations could we plant in this, or
Yeah.
games could we play? Uh, but don't just assume you can come up with a great idea because you have a lot in your head.
I really appreciate both of those responses. And I'm going to invite my colleague Joanne to come back with us now and share questions that may have been accumulating for us in the meantime.
All right, accumulating, amassing is a good word. As soon as you said Risa Q&A, we started getting a whole bunch in the box. So I'm just going to ask Eunice and Daniel that you try to be brief with your responses. I'll try not to pitch questions that we have to unpack, but if anything does require a lengthier response, remember we can always encourage people to come to the post-webinar discussion group at the top of the hour. But I am going to start with Eunice because I think we have a pretty straightforward question. Marge just wants to make sure we understand how you're defining youngers. Are those teens, young adults, Gen Zers?
I think that's kind of self-defined. I think the reason we love youngers and olders is it is contextual. Actually, it's a phrase that we love using from anti-ageism activist Ashton Applewhite. That just indicates you're always older or younger than somebody. And so I would just say, Marge, whatever work you're doing, how do you think about engaging those who are significantly older or younger than whoever might be at the core? There's a lot of great cogenerational work with teens and people who are 50 or 60 plus. There is also some great work with people who are like in their 20s and 30s, even 40s, and doing work with collaborating with folks who are in their 70s and 80s. So
Thank you.
yeah.
Wonderful. I'm going to turn to you, Daniel, because you really inspired people to think about not only faith places in their communities, but other types of organizationals prominent in the community that may have physical spaces to share or to create co-generational opportunities. And people's minds went to the process. So you really talked about how do you get the conversations going and build the relationships. And then there's the practical process of it, right? So Lisa had a great question where my mind kind of went to around things like how do you typically encourage formalized ways of working together, things like MOUs between groups sharing spaces or developing advisory boards with representation from not just the faith community but the community at large as well.
Yeah, that's a good question. A lot of our work is before you get to that point where you're entering into agreements for use of space, and so there we're leaning on kind of formal and informal relationships that are already in place, whether that be with community stakeholders, partners, neighbors. For a lot of faith communities, they don't have as much social capital as we might expect them to have, and so there's a lot of relationship building that's needed. Once they do move toward experimentation and then wanting to put in place some long-term reuses, yeah, we would then get into things like development agreements if they're going to pursue redevelopment of a property for affordable housing, partnership agreements if they're going to turn a space into a healthcare clinic or something of that sort. Yeah, I think, and so those agreements can be kind of sussed out at the appropriate time in the process.
And I'm sure it depends on the scale of how they're interacting. There's
Yeah,
shared spaces, but also if there's shared programming, I'm sure that would differ too. So that's helpful.
we worked with a congregation a couple of weeks ago. We're in the midst of a discernment process with this congregation as well. And they wanted to test out the idea of, it's an African American congregation. They wanted to test out the idea of using their space to support Black entrepreneurs. So we had a farmers market it was a Black farmers market, and olders and youngers participated in the design of it. And they were also the customers in the neighborhood that day. And so for that kind of use, we didn't, a congregation doesn't really need an agreement per se.
Right.
But long term, if they were to move toward making a kind of permanent space for Black entrepreneurs, at that point, they would need some kind of MOU or a use
Sure.
agreement. Yeah.
Great, thank you. I'm going to turn to Eunice, and Eunice, we really literally have about 1 minute left. But again, folks, really great questions. So come to the discussion group after. So we'll have Eunice and Daniel there at the discussion group to answer more questions. But it's really important that we acknowledge that the rural context is a little bit different, particularly when we consider proximity. Any top 1 or 2 tips for ways to create cogenerational approaches in rural settings?
Yeah, such an important question. Thank you for anchoring us in that in the end. Each context is so different. I think rural communities is such an important pillar for cogenerational activity, in part because they have a lot of older adults there. And I think there's also worries that young people will, as they grow older, will leave the community. So finding ways to engage young people intentionally is a really important piece. I would say from a very pragmatic standpoint, I would wonder, are there ways we can engage younger generations in transportation? Maybe that can be part of a volunteer effort. And as they do it, could they do it in a way that isn't just tactical around driving, but could we embed conversation prompts or other things where it's more than just about the tactical? I think a young person might be more intrigued in participating if they felt they might get a relationship in the process.
Great, such a great tip. Well,
Joanne,
I'm
if I
going to
could,
turn it over to Risa now
okay.
because we are needing to close the webinar. But remember, folks, we can continue the conversation with Eunice and Daniel at the discussion group, which is going to start in just 4 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you both. This is so exciting. I'm glad there's so much energy. And again, this is all part of growing this network and engaging with each other, learning from each other. Wanting to let you all know that the next webinar we're going to have is in January, and we're very excited about this topic, transformative narratives for socially connected communities. Our very own Joanne Lee will be with us to share some learnings, as well as Tina Crave from the Greater Watertown Community Health Foundation. So we'll put the registration link in the chat. You'll also see that being promoted through our e-news and other venues, and we hope to see you there. Just a reminder that, we'd love for you to stay up to date and continue to engage with us and our socially connected communities network. And the link will be in the chat momentarily if it's not already there to go see that. And you can see all of the information, our past webinars and web resources and all are here. So be sure to check that out as well. We do love to close this out just to find out from you if you did gain something of value by attending the webinar. So we would love you to just take a second and give us a little quick feedback here. We'll leave this poll open for a minute or so, but we love to know whether or not you felt like you gained something of value today in this particular conversation. And when you complete this poll, if you would also put into the chat if there are some issues or topics related to socially connected communities that you would love to learn more about, we always love to hear from you. That helps to guide our future programming and to understand where we might like to go from here. So we'll give this just another 10 seconds or so. It's basically yes, no. Did you gain something of value today? So we really appreciate you to sharing that as well. And for those who answered, we heard 100% yes. So thank you so much for that. This is just to remind you to put in chat if there's something you'd like us to consider as a future topic. And so let's keep the momentum going. Thank you, Eunice. Thank you, Daniel, for sharing all that wisdom today. And we are hopeful that most of you will consider joining us for the next section, which is a discussion group. We'll close this webinar and we will provide a link momentarily for you to join. we'll be moving into that because that is a meeting setting, and it enables us to be with each other in a much more intimate way. We hope you'll join us. It is a really great way to learn not just from Eunice and Daniel, but also from each other. And so thank you again. Thank you to all of you who joined us for taking some time to lead into this very important topic. And again, stay connected with Healthy Places by Design through LinkedIn, through our newsletter, and through our YouTube channel, where you'll see all the videos of past recordings, and this one will be there soon. And we invite you now to join us for the discussion